We are John and Ellie, the Barefoot Doctors. Join us on this new chapter on our brand new Leopard 45 Catamaran as we unearth the jewels of the Med. And the world. Because life is better barefoot. So guys, welcome back to another episode of the Barefoot Doctor Sailing, and today we've got an exciting episode. A lot of people out there have been asking about the 45 and the 50, and because we've had both exactly the same brand, the 45 and exactly the same brand, Leopard 50, we think we're in a pretty good position to compare apples to apples, so we thought we'd do that for you guys.
It's been requested so many times, we thought we had to interrupt our flow of tripping through the Mediterranean
broadcast
to fulfill the needs of you guys out there. So hope you enjoy this, and we're going to be looking at the differences in every aspect, and also what our view is about who the boat would suit, and also the benefits for each of the boats.
So feel free, if you've got any questions or you want to comment about anything, comment below.
And also guys, please subscribe if you haven't already. We do need that to get the videos out to more people so that the information can be shared.
Buckle up, buckle up.
That's a car expression. Put in your safety harnesses and let's go.
So dramatic.
That brings us to the most important question, which I need to address to Ellie. Does size matter?
Yes and no.
You get that from girls all the time. Maybe not. So explain yourself, honey.
All right, so when we're talking about the size of the 50 and the size of the 45, I noticed a big difference in size. When you're talking about performance, I've got to flick it over to you.
Sure. So let's talk about size first,
Okay.
and the differences between the 45 and the 50.
All right, well, it's obvious that the 50 was a lot bigger to me than what the 45 was. You know, you walk off the back step, the boat was even higher, the 50 was even higher than the 45 in the water. You know, it just seemed so much bigger than what the 45 did.
Yeah, and just to let people who probably haven't thought about this, although it's only 5 foot or maybe 6 foot longer in length, not only do you have that dimension extended, you have the width extended by over half a meter, and you have the height extended as well. So it's cubic, like the increase in size is cubic, not squared. So the volume inside this boat is hugely different, which obviously on some sides of the equation is a good thing, and some sides of the equation is a bad thing. So good things.
So the good things about the 50 is what we really wanted was 4 cabins, as well as having our
Master cabin.
Master cabin was fantastic.
So the master cabin takes up all of the starboard hull, so you don't have that fourth independent cabin on the 45, which you do on the 50. Why did that make a difference to you?
Well, it made a difference in the respect of we have a lot of visitors, we have a lot of family that come and join us on the boat, and also extra storage for John, for his tools. The 4th cabin, the VIP cabin, actually doubled for a bit of a tool shed for John, so he used the drawers and then...
And the understore storage for all of the tools.
Yeah.
And we did have a lot of tools because we were expecting to do cross-ocean passages all the way back to Australia. Even though there's only 2 of us on board, in this last season, in the Med and our 45, we actually had to turn people away who would have joined us on the boat because the 3 cabins were already all used up. If you don't have the expectation of having guests on board, then 3 cabins may not be of any consequence. And in fact, we have some people who have a 50 that change their 4th cabin into a utility room.
Yeah.
So it's a personal choice, but for us, we did like having that 4th cabin.
That's right, we did. So we didn't notice that much of a difference space-wise in the cabins.
Yeah, the cabins are all well spaced and not noticeably different between the 45 and the 50. We just lost 1 cabin.
You know, even in the galley, there's much less storage, there's less space in the galley, there's less space in the actual dinette area. Everything is just a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller. There was significant less storage in the galley in the 45 than the 50. It was even the depth of the drawer, the pots and pans drawer. So, you couldn't fit big pots in there in the 45. I actually had to store the big pot in the dishwasher because it didn't fit in the bottom drawer. We had our hydroponics right along, like still in the galley, right along one wall near the stairs. We don't have that in the 45.
In the 50, you have an extra storage area under the saloon table, which is actually very deep, and we use that for alcohol. The underfloor storage in the hulls was also less in the 45 than the 50, but I think this is of no consequence because you should not be filling up those areas with stuff purely because of the weight. So if you start finding yourself having to fill up those underfloor storages with stuff, I think you're overfilling your boat and you will seriously affect your performance.
So another thing that's really important to us, might not be important to anybody else, is every morning my gorgeous husband brings me a cup of tea in bed. So what we do, we prop ourselves up and we lay back on the backrest of the bed. We couldn't do that in the 45 as comfortably as we could in the 50. So the 50, we still had to negotiate the window that was behind us, but in the 45 there was a crossbeam that seemed to come down that we'd bump our heads on quite often, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so there's enough height to sit, but if you are lifting yourself backwards, the roof was low, so when you're doing this, going backwards, you tend to bump your head, so you had to be careful. So that was noticeable on the 45 and certainly wasn't a problem on the 50.
Might not bother anybody else, but for us, that's...
But you're so tall.
Well, yeah, I am really tall. So I keep telling people. For us, that's, we do a lot of planning. That's,
we sit in bed
talk
a lot,
there,
actually.
we sit in bed, we discuss, because we like to be comfortable and we like to be close to each other. And
we like to stay in bed.
We do, actually.
In the front cockpit in the Leopard 50 and the Leopard 45 both have them. The actual sitting area is almost identical. I've measured it with a tape measure and it's almost identical in size. The difference is because the boat's narrower, on the 45 you only have this narrow area alongside the front cockpit sitting area where you can use as a lounger. So that's really a single lounging area, not a double. Whereas on the 50, you have this nice double lounging area, which was
Lovely.
We used it all the time actually.
And
so
yeah, it was
gorgeous.
just great. Got to hang out together, and you also had overhead shade, which was just magic.
Yeah,
Loved
that is
it.
a really nice area. The front cockpit for us is a game changer. We do love it, and it makes such a difference. When the sun's beating in the back, you can sit at the front. When you're sailing along, you can sit in the front, and navigate from there.
Yeah, it's magic.
He's going to go into performance.
Sure.
Because obviously a 50-foot boat will perform differently from a 45-foot boat. The hull speed is the speed you can get to before you have to plane. It's purely based on length, and so a 50 is going to go naturally and easily faster than a 45. Yeah, and that's what we found. The higher speeds were reached more easily with the 50 if you had enough wind. And the other thing is the 50 being longer rides over the waves better because you have a longer boat to straddle the waves and you have less up and down. The maximum hull speed was 9.5 knots. The hull speed on a 45 is a bit less. But the interesting thing was in very light winds, the 45 did actually perform very well. Now there's two reasons for this. One is it's a lighter boat overall, but also the 50 we had packed for long distance sailing, for living aboard without having resupplies for at least 3 months, and still performed pretty good. On the 45, we have been in situations where we were in 6 knots of wind and we were managing 4 knots of boat speed with the code 0 up at a nice angle. The 45 does sail in light winds very well. The 50 would need more than 6 knots, probably 8 knots before it got to perform well. But it did reach 6 knots in 10 knots of wind. The Leopards do perform surprisingly well for the weight of boat they are.
I felt it was very bobby. The 45 was very bobby.
This is a very technical term. Bobby.
Bobby. I definitely felt like there was a lot more, it was more difficult to get through the waves rather than the 50. We seemed to glide through them. We're still a little bit bobby, but you expect that. Yeah, it was a lot more bobby. Yeah. So while we're talking about size, let's talk about the advantage.
Are you happy, honey?
The sense of that. Let's talk about the advantage of having a 45 or a 50 in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A 45, if all you're doing is sailing in the Med, a 45 is all you need. The harbours and ports are really packed in the Med, so having a smaller boat makes it easier to get a berth, makes it easier to find a space, makes it cheaper. If you're doing purely Med sailing, then certainly a smaller boat is
An advantage
in that regard. Even with the 45, there were some marinas that couldn't fit us in, and there were some marinas that couldn't lift us out. Okay, guys, so we're going to have to change positions because of this grinding, which is about 3 houses away, but it looks like he's going to go on all day, so we'll move inside and try to get out of the noise. Okay guys, so the other thing about having a bigger boat is you have a bigger boat to maneuver. So it's a bit like moving from an ordinary car, driving a truck. If you haven't had the experience of driving a bigger boat, then going from no boat to a 50 is a huge step. And I would certainly recommend you get on a boat and actually see what it's like to actually maneuver a boat this size, because even going from a 42 to a 50 was quite a big step, and you're kind of thinking, whoa, you know, it's so wide, and you do get used to it, and it's just like driving a truck. You get used to driving a bigger vehicle and you learn where the edges are. Maneuvering the 50-foot was significantly more difficult with just the two of us, and this is something very significant which I think people should be aware of. It's a bigger boat, it's heavier, you're much higher off the piers when you are standing on the deck, so if you're trying to jump down or if you're trying to throw ropes, it's further distance to go, and it's a heavier boat to stop. It's all good when you're in calm water and you're going in slow, no worries, but it's when it's blowing 35 knots and you're having to get the lines onto the shore or jump ashore to get the other lines on, that's when things are difficult.
I was the running around and the jumping person. John was... It was a big boat to get from one end to the other when you had to be at that other end right now, because you were either going to need to fend off or something. Yeah. It's a challenge. It's a challenge.
It's a bigger challenge with the 50 than it is with the 45, so people just need to be aware of that. Bringing the mainsail down in 35 knots of wind is not easy in the 50 foot because the sail's very high. If something jams up there, you have more difficulty in untangling it from the lazy jacks or untangling a jammed rope or whatever it is, because it's so much high and there's so much force.
It's a big sail.
And the sail is moving with a lot of force. You've got to do it on both boats, but obviously on the 50 it's so much more important to stabilize the boom before you go up there to work with the flapping sails.
And knock you off that top deck really easy.
It can kill you just with a blow if you haven't stabilized that, and it's the same for every boat, but obviously the bigger the boat, the more the force, the more the danger. Like putting a reef in the 50-footer is significantly harder than the 45. So again, people without any experience probably should either sail a 50 before they buy or before they sign the contract, or they should get some experience and make sure you're happy with handling a boat that size before you buy.
The other thing we noticed on the 50 is because the sail's so big, when you're putting up the mainsail for the last maybe 3 meters?
No more. On the 50 it was like from about 2/3 of the way up.
It screeches.
It's this terrible grinding noise of the rope on the winch. We have 4 wraps around the winch. And I was thinking, oh my God. And I mean, at that stage, we had people on board that were showing us how it worked.
And he said, yeah, that's normal.
That's normal. I'm thinking,
okay.
On the 45, it's only the last 2 or 3 meters where you get that grinding of the tension on the rope and things. And that's all to do with size. So.
Moving right along.
Well, the other thing about having a bigger boat is it does have more carrying capacity, and as we said, we loaded our 50 up with a huge amount of stores, and it still sailed pretty well.
Lifting platform we had on the 50, that was a choice that was one of our calls, my calls I got, which I really loved, just in case I haven't said that. And we didn't have that option on the 45. They don't give you the option of a lifting platform on the 45.
And did you miss it?
Yes, I did. I really, really liked when we could launch the dinghy and we would push a button and the lifting platform went all the way down and then out and then into the water, and basically we just kind of pushed the dinghy off. It seems a lot safer than the lifting davits. The davits, in rough water, there was quite a lot of swing, and also when you're sailing, we had to really tie down the dinghy quite a lot, and then it moves and then it gets a bit loose, so you have to tie down again.
It was certainly a lot easier to offload all your groceries, load the dinghy on the lifting platform, lift it up, and then unload from there, where you're not passing things over from the dinghy in the water to the back transom, which obviously is very tricky in rough water. The disadvantage with the davits, so let's be clear, as Elizabeth said about having to tie the ropes tight, they tend to work themselves loose, and also you tend to get where the dinghy pulls against the stainless steel verticals, you tend to get a bit of wear. If you have the cradle on the lifting platform, there's none of that happening. There's swings and roundabouts.
Okay, so how about we talk about the bridge deck, because that was something that was important to us, because if the lower the bridge deck, the more slapping you tend to get.
We're talking about bridge deck clearance here, so that's the tunnel between the two hulls. If your tunnel is very low, or if your bridge deck is very low, obviously any small waves are going to hit it, and that's going to have a significant effect to slow you down as you're sailing, but also going to be create a lot of pounding when you're sailing upwind. And this is a significant problem on the heavier, bigger cats, which have low bridge deck clearance. The bridge deck clearance on the 45 is 2'9" or 0.83 of a meter, and the bridge deck clearance of the 50 is 1 meter or 3'3". Now this is really, really good. On the 50, if I was in the water, I can't actually touch the bridge deck while I'm just swimming along, and also the dinghy on both boats can go right underneath, from the front to the back, to get the dinghy out if you're in a marina or something like that. The bridge deck on the 45 is 2'9", which again is very good. 0.83 of a meter, and we had no problem with slamming of the boat. So we were very happy with that. We've certainly seen many other boats where there's no headroom and they have to go in on a stand-up board or something like that, so they're floating in on a stand-up board because they don't have the bridge deck clearance. That's a real sign that your bridge deck clearance is really not high enough, guys.
You're the bridge deck police or what?
Yeah, I'm the bridge deck police, guys. So let's talk about the upstairs lounge.
Yes, I love the upstairs lounge too. 45 is a bit smaller, and the table also is a bit smaller.
And because the boom is lower, you have to duck under it if it's in the normal position. So you can obviously pull the boom out to the side, get it away from the lounge area, or you can pull the topping lift up. But we didn't. We just left it and sat on one side. It was fine. On the Leopard 50, the boom is above your head, so you can walk backwards and forwards with the boom in its normal position above your head, or even above my head.
A lot more space.
At 6 foot. Which is good for the lounge, but it's not so good for packing the sail. To pack the sail on the 50, first of all, you do have to climb up on the steering station roof or the back of the seat. It's much more of an effort because you're doing everything up there, whereas on the 45, the boom, as I said, is so much lower. You stand up on the seats in the cockpit and the steering station again, and you can pack the boat very easily. As you walk forward, on the 45, you can pack the sail by standing, although I must say I find it easier to step up and use the steering station, and then you can do it, at waist height. So storing the sail on the 50 is significantly harder than on the 45. So because you're in a bigger boat, the cost for berthing, the cost for lift out on the 50 is higher than on the 45, but I think everybody can work out those arithmetic because it's usually based on length and width.
And the next thing we'd like to talk about is the draft between the two boats.
Yeah, so the draft of the 50 is 5'3" or 1.6 meters, and in the 45 is 1.5 meters or 4'11". So there's 4 inches of difference in draft, which isn't a lot. But if you're wanting to sail in shallow waters like the Bahamas, for example, every little bit of reduced draft does help. Obviously, we sailed the 50 in the Bahamas and had to take great care going through passages. Not a big deal though, because if you're playing it safe, then you're going to keep well clear of both anyway. but the Leopard 45 does give you more room for error. If I was sailing only in the Bahamas and the eastern coast of the US, then I'd probably be happy with a 45. And we had to not go to places which we wanted to go to. The big question is, who should get a 50 and who should get a 45 in our view? Okay, so the 45 and the 50, both are wonderful. The 45 is significantly easier to handle than the 50, and the 50 is significantly better in big ocean swell or big seas than the 45. My view is that the 45 is really good if you're short-handed and if you are not going to be doing big ocean crossings.
Although they do big ocean crossings with 45s.
Yeah, they do. They sail around the world quite comfortably, but the extra length on the 50, if you can afford it and if you can handle it, then that'll give you more comfortable crossings. So it's not about ability or inability to do the crossings. It's more about the comfort and the potentially increased speed that you get on the bigger boat. So that's why the 50 is better for if you're doing around the world sailing. But if you're short-handed, 45 is easier to handle when things get bad. At the end of the day, it's obviously a very personal decision. If you've had no experience at all, I know a lot of people do make the 50 their first boat. I would be pretty nervous about that with my knowledge, because there are certain things that are hard to do. And if things jam and go wrong on a 50, unjamming them and fixing them up is even harder than it is on the 45. So no experience at all, I would probably recommend go for a 45 first. Having said that, a lot of people have done it and are fine. So get the experience before you get the 50, please.
For me, if I was to choose again the kind of cruising that we do, which is ocean crossings and big distances and things like that, and for the fourth cabin and the comfort and the not the bobbiness, whatever that is, I would be inclined, if someone offered me a 45 or a 50 right now, I'd still take the 50. If someone said, here's two boats, a 45 or 50, which one would you go?
Well, if I was just sailing in the Med, I'd go for the 45 for sure. For me, if I was sailing outside the Med and crossing the Atlantic, crossing the Pacific, I would definitely do the 50.
I guess in summary, it's not about which boat is better than the other, the 45 or the 50. It really comes down to what sort of cruising you're going to do, how many people you're going to have on board, do you need the space, are you just cruising offshore or you're doing big ocean crossings. So I hope you've enjoyed this comparison from the 45 to the 50. Both Leopards, apples for apples, and we've sailed them both. So.
Okay guys, so I hope that was useful for you all. And coming up are some really exciting episodes that we have in terms of the perfect catamaran for us. So
because we're still looking.
We're still looking.
But we know it's out there. We know you're out there, you catamaran.
You're crazy.
That's it from us, guys. All the best. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys. And if you like what we do, show us the love and hit the like button. Then hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell as well, so you don't miss out on your regular fix. Then kick off your shoes and you can come barefoot with us.